Hey everybody, it's a big crowd. One of the things I want to talk about today is, we hear a lot about transformation and we hear a lot about digital centricity. There are a lot of phrases that get thrown out these days, and everybody gets advice from somewhere about how to do things that help you be more customer centric. So I wanted to step back from that a little bit and try and break it down into kind of 5 core beliefs that we talk about, and then leave you guys with some stuff that you can actually go do. I'm pretty big on doing presentations where when the audience walks out, they're like, oh, I can take that with me. That's something I can do tomorrow. That's something that will actually help. And I'm going to leave a little bit of time for Q&A post this. I think we'll have some volunteers running around with some mics. Because I also have this firm belief that when you watch presentations, you generally are going to have some questions. You should actually be able to ask them without having to chase somebody down in the hallways. Quick introduction. My name's Joey. So I manage the Southeast for SapientRazorfish, which is primarily our Miami and Atlanta offices, about 700 people here. So we tend to run into a lot of these kind of challenges that are facing businesses today. How do you be digitally centric? How do you use technology not just to keep the lights on, but to actually meet human needs, like to meet consumers where they're at? What happens when somebody comes up with a new business model that's going to disrupt what I'm doing? Those are fundamental questions we kind of all face. It doesn't matter what business we're in, they're happening. Even if it's just as simple as I need to make more money because I need to actually meet consumers where they have a need, and I need to be able to craft experiences to actually do that. So I don't want everybody to read this. There won't be a quiz later. I use this basically to control what I say from a conversation perspective. But the one thing I want you guys to take away from what's happening these days is simple. It's the use of technology, the acceleration of technology is actually changing the way consumers approach businesses, which is changing how money moves around. So as a for instance, in the last 10 years, pretty much all of the biggest IPOs in the world are businesses that don't own anything. They don't have any physical inventory. The largest retailer in the world doesn't have locations, doesn't have inventory. The largest media company in the world doesn't actually create any content. The largest connecting company in the world, actually all it does is create a pathway for users to talk to each other, and it owns nothing. So you start to think about things like that. The largest taxi company in the world, everybody loves the Uber example, doesn't actually own cars. That's happening in pretty much every industry bar none. Now this disruption's coming because these people are focused obsessively on what a human need is and how to actually take advantage of that and connect the dots. So that's really what I want you guys to take away from this. Now, what I believe is one of the keys to actually getting to that space where you can transform your business is this thing called focus. So I always love, little quotes in presentations. And what inevitably happens is I'm picking from a bunch of quotes and they don't actually do the right thing, and then occasionally a graphic artist or designer will show up and say, no, you should use this one. So they found this wonderful little quote by Socrates which has focus in the middle of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about focusing. How do you actually focus your business? We all have 50 things to do every day. We all have 100 initiatives running through our company. All of those things are important, but they might not be the thing that's actually going to help us start down this path of transformation. So what does it mean when we think about how do I get to a space where I'm always in front of the consumer, where I'm anticipating their need, where I'm crafting experiences that actually enhance their experience with my company and actually drive my bottom line forward. So I'm going to try and leave you guys with 5 things that will help you kind of harness and focus, and then at the end of this, there'll be one actually specific thing that I think you can do when you leave here today that'll help your business. It'll help you personally, it'll help your business. So the first is something that I would say is a pet peeve of mine, working with clients and also working with my internal teams and candidly in my personal life, which is, I think or I believe instead of I know or I can prove. So we get into these generalizations, we use partial truths, or we use generalizations, and I believe these things sabotage transformation, and I believe they also sabotage performance, and I believe they also sabotage relationships. I have this conversation with myself all the time. I'm really good with clients in saying, no, we can't say I think, we need to be data sleuths. We need to absolutely understand what the data tells us. We need to obsess about it because that's the pathway for creating amazing presentations, amazing experiences, right? That's what gets us to the center of human need so that we can drive our business forward. But then I go home and I have a discussion or a disagreement with my wife, and I find myself saying, I think because I want to be right. That's something we can translate from our personal lives to our business life. The point here is obsess about data, use data, know exactly what you can prove, build experiences based on it, or know exactly what you can test and don't be afraid to actually test it. There's a nice little backdrop here that somebody designed for me with flowers to remind me to tell you this little story. So there's an interesting thing from 1-800-Flowers that they've done. So something like 80% of their sales comes during holidays, comes during Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, Christmas, New Year's, the times you would expect. They used to be terrified of changing experiences during those. No, we can't change anything while we're making the most money in our business. Finally, along comes some enterprising individual that starts sleuthing out data, and they determine that they could markedly change business performance on any given day. On Valentine's Day, if we're willing to get out of code freeze, and we're willing to actually test and modify things, navigation, presentation, promotions, merchandising, we can actually double the amount of money we make on that day. They used data and they weren't afraid of actually crafting experiences and being able to test them. They recognized that speed was more important than perfection, and they recognized that the times in your business where consumers tell you the most about what they want are the times where you actually should be the bravest. So again, don't let partial truths or generalizations sabotage performance. The other thing I see a lot is related to imagining things and then never building them. How many of you ever seen a nice blueprint for a house and you're like, that would be amazing. You're listening to the architect talk about it. You're listening to the future homeowner talk about it. And eventually you get to the point, it's like, well, are we going to build the damn thing so I can actually see what it's like? This happens a lot. We imagine a lot of things. We come up with a lot of ideas. We think about things that we can do, and then we forget about them and we move on to something else. So it goes back to focus. When you're imagining a way to craft a great experience, a way to do something that's going to be transformative for your business, don't stop. This is one of the single biggest mistakes I see clients make. They do a lot of thinking, and then they do nothing with the thinking. It's not an imperative, it's not an incentive, it's not endemic in the organization that they actually have to move into realization. Many times it's because they're afraid to try things. They build business cases, they require business cases, they require, funding from capital projects, and they think about something that's going to take $2 million as a finished product as opposed to something I can test for $20,000. That actually creates a snowball effect. So don't be afraid to actually build things and have them not work. A lot of the companies that we see advancing the most will fail at 8 things that they built and tried. They just recognize that they turn them off in a week or 2 weeks, and it's okay because the 2 things that do work actually make them more money than the cost of the 10 things that they actually built and tried. Next is this concept that goes from that, which is when you do those things, you need to make them systemic. So to be radically customer-centric, you can't actually do this in sporadic moments. You've got to actually build this culture in your organization that does these things by process. You don't need to be reminded to do them. It's just the way you do stuff. So this concept is to be radical, you can't be hit or miss. You can't do it over here a few times and then not do it systemically. And that goes back to if it's just cosmetic. If I'm just changing some navigation, if I'm just going to change some merchandising or promotion, if I'm just going to change, an end cap in a physical store, then you're not actually creating transformation because you're not being systemic. And by systemic, I mean the companies that really advance their business, that really make more money, that generate more profit. They do that because they meet consumers where they need something. They've actually created an organizational culture. They're using technology not just to keep the lights on, they're using technology to actually advance experiences. This is the way they work. So the point here is, when you think about companies that are succeeding, they're actually making this the way they do business. There's a little example here we have from Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's is 500-year-old bank, one of the oldest kind of corporate institutions in the world. they ran into this place where it was taking 50 days for customers to open an account. Imagine you go to open a checking account in the States and it takes 50 days. We'd all be losing our minds, but that was what was happening to them. So they asked us to step in and figure out how to create a systemic culture for them to actually solve this basic human need, which is I need to get this done faster. Therefore, I'm going to have a better experience. We found this one little thing inside of that place, that August institution, where somebody applying for a checking account online, 6 different human beings on the back end actually had to have a piece of paper printed out and stamp it for that to be approved. Their regulatory process was important, but it was actually killing the customer experience. So one of the things that they had to do that was systemic is they had to actually reconcile those two things. 6 humans shouldn't have to print out a piece of paper and stamp it approved just so somebody can apply for an account that they wanted to do online, via their phone, via their desktop. So there's little things like that that you have to think about from a cultural perspective, from an organizational perspective. And again, you have to think behind the scenes too. This isn't Disney, right, where there's magic out here and it can be a hot mess back here. It actually is going to be much better up here if it's not disrupted back here. So kind of the final thing to leave you guys with is this concept of you can't transform unless you're first digitally centric. What I mean by that is the way consumers approach us these days is almost universally via some digitized experience. They're starting in mobile, they're starting in web. You guys know all this stuff, and we've been talking about it for 10 years. But organizationally, we still do things in a manner that's mostly about how we do business or how we have done things in the past. You know, if you're a creative director in the room, and I know there are a few out there from our business, how many times have you asked a company or been asked, I know this happens to us all the time, I need a new campaign as a simple example. Okay, let's talk about what consumers need, how we're actually going to promote our product. Let's get briefed on this. And it starts from a 30-second spot. It starts from one of the most antiquated spaces in the creative universe for products and for the expectations consumers have. My point there is, think about things from a how would I do this starting in digital and have that span out, as opposed to how would I do this from a what I want to accomplish from a business perspective. What you'll find is that you'll actually meet in the middle somewhere. You won't always get there because it's hard. We have organizations, we have processes, we have regulations, we have all of those things. But you'll find that if you force yourself and you force your teams to think like that, you'll actually get faster to better outcomes. You won't be solving problems like, you know, mobile traffic is rising, but mobile conversion is 1/3 of desktop traffic. That is a truism. How are you going to solve that truism if you keep starting from desktop as a design example? So there's little things like that that you can do to actually force yourself to be more digitally centric, and that'll actually help you become radically customer centric, and that'll actually help you advance your transformation agenda. So I have a few more minutes left, and I want to leave time for questions. But I want to leave you guys with something that you can do. And I didn't make this up, so I'm not going to take credit for it. Someone else who's much smarter than me made this up, but I think it's a brilliant way to think about businesses. And that is, step away. Go home tonight and imagine that you weren't working for your company anymore and you were so pissed off at them that you were going to make it your life's mission to actually take them down. Get out a blank piece of paper and write down your worst nightmare. You know your business, you know your company, you know the ins and outs of it, you know how you make money, you know who your consumers are, because you're data sleuths, right? Write down how, if that happened to you, you would actually create a new company to compete in the best possible manner with the one you're at right now. You'll be amazed what you'll write down on this piece of paper. You'll be amazed what you don't think about on a day-to-day basis that you'll actually write down, which are really ridiculously innovative ways to actually start to undermine your existing business performance. You understand your weaknesses, you know what consumers are after. Again, you'll be amazed with what you write down. And then you can actually utilize that. So if you start there, if you write that down, if you write down what consumers really want, you're going to find, and my guess is, that you'll have written down a bunch of things that really start with human need and what consumers are after, and you'll actually have written down how you're going to build a company to get at that, and what your competitive advantages are going to be against your existing business. Now you can step back into your world. You can go back to your cubicle. You can go back to your office. You can go back to the room on your house where you work. And you can actually translate that into a set of things that you will do in your company today and tomorrow to actually improve your business, to actually get at human needs, to actually anticipate consumer desires, to craft better experiences, to change the way you do things in your organization. And I think that's the kind of key to being radically customer-centric. And if you have that focus, you'll begin to transform your business. So I would encourage everybody to do that. I've tried it a few times. I've tried it on us, and it's amazing what you write down when you actually know the business and you imagine that you've got to now disrupt it yourself. That doesn't mean all of your organizations are going to adopt it. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Changing things is never easy. It's always difficult. But I think you'll be amazed at how many things from that white piece of paper you'll actually be able to use on a day-to-day basis. And because of that, I think you'll go back and you'll actually craft better experiences. You'll understand consumer needs. You'll be a better data sleuth. You'll make it a little bit more systemic in the way you do things on a day-to-day basis. And I think what you'll do is you'll start to transform your company. Thank you guys very much. Hopefully it was useful. If you have any questions, happy to answer them. Apparently I have 1 minute and 32 seconds left.
Do you want to take it? Go ahead.
If we have questions, I'll happily answer them. I think one down here. We got flashlights. You can scream too.
Hi, my name is Ari. I'm with Virtuorama. We're a mixed reality production studio. I want to know what's your take on VR for brands and agencies? How you think they're going to embrace VR?
I think it's an amazing technology that no one's actually quite figured out yet. It's kind of like 360 video. If you watch Travel and Hospitality and you watch panoramas, it's a thing that was very interesting from a content perspective, but the technology just hadn't advanced enough to actually make it useful. And I think that's happening with VR right now. I believe that particularly with spatial experiences, VR has a big role to play in the future. If you're thinking about cruising or you're thinking about travel or you're thinking about showrooms, you're thinking about automobiles, I think that VR actually has a huge role to play. I'd like to see the technology a little bit more advanced. It's still a little bit difficult to work with. It still doesn't have the right resolutions that I think we need for that. But my guess is I think it's worthwhile to place some bets on that being an amazing way to craft both in-home and in-store experiences for consumers in the future. I'd just like to see it a little further along. One down here. Tell me when I have to go Little Bo Peep.
Hi. Oh, being blinded over here. You talk about a lot of like gathering data and analyzing it and looking at that to make decisions. I kind of wanted to know a little bit more of like what you think is the best way to do those decisions. Let's say like you come across a lot of like, well, this isn't working. How do you find that what is working? How should we do it? Do you just do like A/B testing? Do you just continue to try new things until you hit the right one? What's kind of the good solution for that?
Yeah, that's a $1 million question, or it could be a $1 billion question, depending on how you look at it. I think part of it is process and part of it is kind of obsession. So I like A/B testing. I like multivariate testing. What I like most of all is just having a concept that, here's an example. I try and make the example simple. So you got a website, you want your website to perform better, right? If you're in retail, you want actually more people to progress from traffic to putting things in a shopping cart, and the more people to progress from shopping cart to actually checking out, right? Pretty simple business logic and math. Divide those into sections, right? I got traffic to cart, I got cart to checkout. Take each of those as a testing area. How do I delineate improvement I want to make in terms of traffic to cart and from cart to checkout, and then pick them apart? So take the traffic to cart. I want to do and test a bunch of things: navigation, merchandising, buttons. right? You'd be amazed sometimes how much a button color matters to people. Pick the testing elements you want to test and actually work on them. Create a traffic progression plan. So you create your test. I've got my control. I want to start with 10%. I want to escalate to 25%. I want to escalate to 50%. I want to escalate to 100%. Give yourself a time frame. I want to do this within 3 weeks. Within 3 weeks, I want to go from 10% of traffic on my test to 100% of traffic because it's beating control on some simple thing. I want to reorient navigation, right? Pick an element. And then work it. On day one, when you go to 10% traffic, 75% of the stuff we test does not beat control. Most people give up right then and there. What we do is we actually have our creative teams wake up every morning and obsess about what must be worked that day to continue to improve it. And nothing can be sacred. Nothing can be sentimental. Like, don't design things and then go, oh, I love that, it's so beautiful. Design it and then start breaking it the next day. But create your control areas, create your progression plan, give yourself a very short window and obsess about it every day. I would say 75% of things don't beat control at 10% or at 25%. And if you do it like that, 75% of things will actually beat control by the time you progress to 100. The fallout a lot of times is too many variables and too much time. But you also, again, you need your team waking up in the morning, looking at the report from yesterday and saying, did more people go from just showing up on the site to creating a cart? If they did not, we got to continue to change things. So I think a lot of it is patience and perseverance. And that goes back to the, it's got to be systemic. You actually have to make yourself do that. But the companies I watch do that, they drive their business up on a month-to-month basis. But it's just, again, it's not necessarily the methodology as much as it is the obsession. And pick a data point. So that's the other thing I would tell you. Everybody loves to have 50 things they measure. Figure out which one is the most important thing. Still measure all the rest of it, but obsess about the most important thing. When you obsess about 3 measures of performance, you'll almost always get it wrong. Obsess about one. It's hard to pick one. But that's why I use this simple example of increasing the number of people to go through, because it's a very linear thing that you can actually measure pretty easily.
Okay, I'm going to obsess about time.
Yeah.
Okay, we're out of time. Thank you very much, Joy.
Thank you, guys.